One of my subscribers posted a long rant to one of my videos and asked if I could reply to it. Let's take a look, see what we can see. 100% proof that Christianity is the truth. 1. Supernatural experiences from God. My visions of God. These are my testimonies of how God visited me in open visions and gave me a message and a prophecy. My encounters with demons. These are my testimonies of how I was attacked by demons. I've listened to these experiences he's claimed, and they come off more as feelings than anything else.
So basically, I was trying to sleep. I was in my bed, but I was awake. For some reason I couldn't sleep, and I felt the really evil presence.
Back in the long-lost days of 1984, I had feelings of dread and fear that there were gremlins under my bed. I lost a lot of sleep those months. Thanks, Joe Dante. Anyway, my feelings of terror, no matter how real they seemed to me at the time, were unfounded. We can trick ourselves into believing things that are simply not there and didn't happen. You can look into the works of Elizabeth Loftus and see how we can reshape recollections into memories that didn't happen.
I looked up and I saw Jesus Christ in the clouds, and I was in my room, so I didn't see this vision with my physical eyes. I saw it in my spiritual eyes, and it was amazing.
We need evidence to accurately determine how the world works. Your feelings have no evidence behind them. Every religion has practitioners who have feelings that back up their beliefs, but feelings don't equal confirmation. If we were to conflate feelings with evidence, then all religions would have the same evidence behind them, and I doubt you claim that all religions are true. These claims are psychological projections without a hint of real-world evidence. 2. 2,000 plus fulfilled Bible prophecies. Here are some of the prophecies that the Bible said would come to pass before the end times. 1. People will deny that God created the universe and that he judged them through Noah's flood. 2 Peter 3:3, 5, 6. Atheists are now claiming that the universe created itself out of nothing. Wow! People will say that impossible events that left no evidence, like, say, a worldwide flood, survived by only one family on a wooden boat, keeping every kind of animal, didn't happen? What a shock. If I was to claim that I flew to the moon, had tea with the moon men, flew home, and then said no one would believe me, and then claimed that nobody believing my impossible story meant it must be true, nobody in their right minds would accept it, and saying, "Ha, I said you wouldn't believe me, so it must be true," would not be convincing evidence. Also, I know how you brought up Peter 3:3, 5, and 6, but left out 3:4, which talked about Jesus' prophesied return, which never happened. Apparently, Jesus claimed he was going to return before that current generation ended, but never did. So why didn't that prophecy get fulfilled? And it's not like you didn't know about it. That passage gets brought up later in the screed. As for the universe from nothing, some physicists do claim that. Lawrence Krauss comes to mind. Currently, I take a more pragmatic approach. We know the universe exists. We know there was some kind of expansion 14 billion or so years ago, but we don't know how it happened. Yet. I admit my ignorance on that subject, and I hope someday there'll be evidence of some kind to give us an explanation. The message of the gospel will reach all nations. Matthew 24:14. Remember that Christianity started out with only a few dozen followers. Jesus prophesizing that his message will reach the world is proof of its divine inspiration. Most cults that actively try to gain more practitioners usually claim that eventually they will be known throughout the world. A good carrot for gaining more subscribers is to say, this is going to be the biggest religion ever, better get in on the ground floor. How many leaders looking to draw in new recruits would say, join us, no one else is going to? But if many religions said they were going to be huge, and only a handful did get worldwide recognition, it's not prediction, but luck of the draw. It would be like having a lottery, with each of the tickets claiming they would win, but only one does. The winner would be correct in saying they were going to win because they all said that. The ones that lost would also say the same thing, but were forgotten. Jews will return to Israel, their homeland, Ezekiel 34:13. Israel will be a nation for the third time, Amos 9:14-15. Wishful thinking that actually came true. The Israelites were without a homeland and wanted one, so it makes sense that their text would give them hope they would gain one. I've often said, someday my local Walmart will bring back the Mint Arrow bar, and recently, it did! I was not being psychic, but what I was hoping and claiming to happen eventually did. There will be money-hungry preachers that deceive Christians and lead them away from the truth. 2 Peter 2:1-3. Holy men were profiting off believers well before this was written. That's not prophecy. That's saying what's going on at the time and saying it will continue. If I said the sun will rise in the future, I'm not making any great claims, since it's been doing that for longer than I've been around. Which conveniently leads us to, scoffers will mock the second coming by claiming that these signs have always been around. 2 Peter 3:3-4. Again, more ass covering. These signs have been going on. It's not mocking, but simply observing that your prophecies are not prophetic at all. Like the example I just gave, I can say the sun will rise tomorrow, and there will be people out there who will say that isn't prophecy because it's always risen on a roughly 24-hour schedule, rightfully calling me out on it. Speaking of end times, God gave me visions about the rapture, the Antichrist, and tribulations. Obama is the future Antichrist. Well, you know what? He might have to hurry up then. His successor has already been elected. Ugh. So he only has a little over a month at the time of this recording to get his anti-Christing done. He'll have to hurry up to take control of the world's economy, get the world's armies gathered together to fight against Christ, and attempt to destroy Israel. Seriously, if he's able to do all that before Trump takes over in January, if nothing else, he'll have to be congratulated on the rapid work he does. 3. Near-death experiences, heaven and hell testimonies. Near-death experiences prove Christianity. We find testimonies of former atheists, Buddhists, Muslims, etc., claiming they died and went to the afterlife, but were saved and brought back by Jesus Christ. There are countless testimonies just on YouTube alone, and the people that ventured into the afterlife describe the Christian concept of life after death, heaven and hell. If NDEs were open to interpretation, we would find testimonies of people that said when they died, they met Allah, or Muhammad, or Buddha. But, since we only find testimonies of people saying they were saved by Jesus, we have additional evidence that Christianity is the truth. When Muslims die, they don't hallucinate about Allah, and when Hindus die, they don't hallucinate about reincarnation. What we see is the truth of Christianity being preached by those who died and came back. This is completely untrue. Listverse recently put out 10 different near-death experiences from a multitude of different times and cultures. It's an interesting read, something you might want to check out if you have a few minutes to kill. The only thing they have in common seems to be the fact that they were all influenced by the cultures they were living in at the time. You're right, if there was only a single afterlife and everybody had the same experience regardless of cultural background, that might be an indication of said afterlife. But, since all of these were so varied, it points to the lies they lived, influencing what they believed and shaping what they experienced. Again, go back to the start of this video where I discuss false memories of events. It would not be inconceivable to assume that people filled the experiences when their brains were not functioning properly with what society told them to expect. 4. Preservation of the Bible. Because we have 5,000 plus ancient manuscripts of the Bible, we have a great deal of evidence that the contents of each book of the Bible have been preserved and that the Bible has not changed to make up for prophecy. The ancient manuscripts date all the way back to around 250 BC and verified with the modern Christian Bible. Saying that the Bible is unchanged is laughably wrong. I would suggest you read Professor Bart Einharm's Misquoting Jesus. He shows how the Bible has changed over time to account for both accidental and deliberate changes to the scriptures.
What we have are copies made centuries later, many of them many centuries later. These thousands of copies that we have are all different from one another in lots of little ways and sometimes in big ways. So not only do we not have the originals, we don't have the first copies, or the copies of 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 the copies, etc., etc. Mistakes were made en route, and these mistakes were replicated. Now, and when you compare these copies with one another, there are lots of mistakes in them because no two of these copies are exactly alike in their wording. To the shock and dismay of many of his readers, when John Mill produced his edition of the Greek New Testament, it included an apparatus at the bottom of the page that cited 30,000 places where the manuscripts differed from one another. There are more differences in our manuscripts than there are words in the New Testament. But there are some changes that don't look like they could possibly simply be a slip of the pen.
Regarding changes relating to prophecy, I discussed this in an earlier video, but for example, biblical scholars agreed that the writings in Isaiah, specifically chapters 40 to 66, were added much later, and those were written to conform to past events, but look like prophecy regarding Cyrus in the Babylonian captivity. And even the oldest Isaiah scroll dates back to only 125 BCE, several hundred years after Cyrus was assumed to have lived. 5. Facts from the Bible that have been verified by modern science. Remember, these facts were written thousands of years ago. Like the rest of this, they only give references, not the actual passages themselves. If they were quoted, they would show how vague these claims really are and how much you would have to twist the phrasing to match with current science. I've added them for our convenience. The earth floats free in space. Job 26:7. He stretcheth out the north over the empty place, and hangeth the earth upon nothing. At the time, people thought the earth sat on a large animal. The Bible also says that the earth sits on pillars, even in the same book of the Bible you're pulling from. You can't have two completely opposite claims about something in a text and then claim the text is inerrant. In fact, the Bible claims that the world rests on something multiple times across the text. Does that mean it's even more likely that the earth sits upon a physical base? And how exactly do you stretch out north? What does that even mean to stretch out a direction? Finally, we don't float free in space. We're held in our orbit by gravity, a natural force. The earth is round. Isaiah 40:22. It is he that sitteth upon the circle of the earth, and the inhabitants thereof are grasshoppers, that stretcheth out the heavens as a curtain, and spreadeth them out as a tent to dwell in. At the time, people thought the earth was flat. As I mentioned, the oldest copies of Isaiah date back to 125 BCE. The Greeks knew the earth was spherical long before then. Aristophanes worked it out around 240 BCE. From measuring the difference in shadows at local noon, he was able to work out a rough measurement of the size of the earth. Basically, the fact that a shadow will be longer the further it is from the equator at the same time of day, and a bit of geometry, will enable one to work out the shape of the world. And I can be a bit nitpicky, but a circle is not the same as a sphere. The disk world, for example, is a world that exists as a circle, not a sphere. That too. Blood is the source of life. Leviticus 17:11. For the life of the flesh is in the blood, and I have given it to you upon the altar to make atonement for your souls. For it is the blood that maketh an atonement for the soul. Up until the 1700s, people were bled because they thought it would get rid of their sickness. They should have listened to the Bible. First off, this is claiming that blood is needed for sacrifices. Just a simple blood for God statement and all that. But it's not a surprise that people thought blood was important for life. That's a simple observation. If you run out of blood, you die. I knew a 5-year-old whose favorite word was exsanguination, so it's not that intensive a scientific breakthrough. Medical practitioners of the past knew of this principle and assumed that bad blood was causing sickness. They observed that if you remove some blood, it will get replaced eventually, so they figured that their best move was to drain the bad blood out and hope the body would replace it eventually. Also from Leviticus, it says that dripping dead bird blood from a living bird on someone will be a cure for leprosy. With passages like that, I really don't think this tome should be considered an accurate medical journal. Really, if blood is the source of life, does that mean if we put fresh, healthy blood into a corpse, it'll come back to life?
It's alive! Oh, it's alive! It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
Vic, apparently you don't need all that electricity. Just fill your little project up with fresh blood. Should have been fine. Air has weight. Job 28:25. To make the weight for the winds, and he weigheth the waters by measure. It doesn't say air, it says wind. And on a windy day, we can feel the pressure and force of wind on our faces. It's not shocking to say if we can feel something pushing against us, we can assume it has weight. Air has a cycle. Ecclesiastes 1:6. The wind goeth towards the south, and turneth about unto the north, and whirleth about constantly, and the wind returneth again according to his circuits. This is an observation that wind can blow both from the north to south and south to north, and that places where wind once blew will have wind blowing in them again. Noting wind blowing all over the place is about as deep a scientific discovery as water being wet, or salt being salty. There are hot water vents at the bottom of the deep seas. Job 38:16. Hast thou entered the springs of the sea, or hast thou walked in search of the depth? This fact wasn't verified until the 20th century with submarine technology. This doesn't mention vents at all. It talks about sections of water moving about in the oceans. Water currents were well known by fishing or sailing cultures at the time. This is simply a case of a vague comment that really means nothing that has been appropriated to match current understandings. Do you know where you're going when you die? Heaven or hell? How do we know that either of those will be options? As far as I can tell, once the brain shuts off, that's the end. There'll be no personality, nothing that defines my thoughts as me, left. If you have testable evidence of an afterlife, please present it. Until then, as far as I know, when my brain stops, I'm gone. So I hope my responses were coherent enough. As always, if you have questions of your own, or come across something you think I should go over, please send them my way. What?